Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Jay, thanks for joining. Uh, we will have Mr. Dr. Abid Suleri coming in a few minutes as he's in another meeting and joining. Famida said she will be joining in. So I'm not sure about Enrique. It might be midnight for him, but he said he will join. But I think without much ado, welcome everyone, the participants, the panelists, the observers for this first of its kind South Asian think tanks. I think it's high time we all met and try to do something together, learn from each other. And this is so nice that everyone I approach just with one call or with a mail immediately accepted. And thank you so much for that with your busy schedule. I now request Mr. Gurucharan, who's the director of Public Affairs Center, he's a facilitator for this program. I'm asking him to just kickstart the program. Welcome, Mr. Gurucharan.
Very good afternoon, all of you. On behalf of the Public Affairs Center, Bangalore, let me welcome you to this OTT local conference for South Asia. It's really an honor for me as the director of the Public Affairs Center to have such a distinguished panel of executive directors from different countries that comprise South Asia, each distinguished for the work that they are doing, and each think tank having contributed in considerable measure to the development of the respective countries. I also want to welcome the two observers. I'd fail in my duty if I didn't formally welcome everybody by name, so let me do that. We have Mr. Jayatilaka, Executive Director, SIPA, Sri Lanka. We have Mr. Suleri from SDPI, Pakistan. We have Asang from CDS, Myanmar. Mr. Kanchan Dikshit from ISET, Nepal. We have Dr. Famida Khatun from CPD, Bangladesh. Jai Asundi from C-Step, Bangalore, and Nitin Pai from Takshashila. So very warm welcome to all of you. We also have a fair number of very distinguished participants, all eager to listen to the various executive directors who have gathered together for this conference. Before I begin, let me thank OTT and Enrique in particular for this opportunity. It's just the right time, I think, to shift focus from the global north to the global south, not least because considerable good work is being done by all those think tanks that have gathered together today in this local conference, as you will hear from each of them when they present their expert views. This conference is important to my mind for two reasons. First, the region as a whole, South Asia, we face common challenges, primarily the human development challenge. But more important is the reason that this gives us the opportunity to consider how we might collaborate together in a manner that actually will help the region grow and put us in the forefront of intellectual discourse that becomes influential, not just in South Asia, but indeed the rest of the world. For those of you who are not familiar with the Public Affairs Center, we are a not-for-profit think tank engaged in action research in India primarily, though we partner with other institutions to work outside India. We are 26 years old. We started as a social accountability organization. We pioneered social accountability tools. Indeed, we invented the Citizen Report Card, which today is considered one of the important tools for eliciting data from consumers and clients. We have a sister organization called the Public Affairs Foundation, which specializes in training and capacity building. And Dr. Annapurna is the executive director of the PAF. I must thank her for all the arrangements that she made of bringing this superb panel together. We also have an important vertical called the Center for Open Data Research. CODR is the analytics arm of the PAC, and it engages primarily in the application of data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques to development governance. And we have with us Mr. Thomas Jacob, who is the head of CODR. He's going to be listening very keenly to what is happening in the other countries in South Asia. And this is perhaps one area where the true potential for collaboration exists. Finally, before I conclude about PAC, we have a flagship project, a flagship product that we produce every year called the Public Affairs Index. It's a composite index that measures the quality of governance of the states in India. It has been produced for the last 6 years and has become a benchmark in assessing the quality of governance, public governance in India, accepted widely across Government of India, the states, and amongst academics and researchers. Let me now quickly come to the conference per se. And as in my role as moderator, it's relatively easier than that of all of you as expert panelists. What I would like to do is to just frame what I believe should be the terms of the discourse. Essentially, questions that the panelists might like to ponder. The first is to ask the question of ourselves. When we say, the pandemic has given rise to challenges and problems, and ask the question, what needs to change? I think the first question we need to ask is, where does the fifth estate, as it's dubbed, or civil society, get its legitimacy from? Short answer, we get our legitimacy from the grassroots, from the citizens, from the people. So how can we better connect and strengthen our roots in a manner that we are able to better articulate the problems of the public? This is something that we need to debate. Second, how can we frame evidence-based research in a manner that governments begin to use it in substantial measure? We have seen the work that each of us does has been adopted by government in part sometimes, but there is no institutional compelling arrangement that would enable government to draw insights, evidence-based insights from the work that you and I do. So how can we actually ensure that we frame our research in a manner that governments can use it for coherent public policy and for well-designed programmatic interventions to improve development outcomes? And the third question that I would reflect on and refer to the panel is an important one, especially in the context of the pandemic. How can we advance the adoption of science and technology, particularly the application of data science, that can help advance development strategy in South Asia? I think the low-hanging fruit have already been picked. Each of the countries in South Asia have made quite remarkable strides in their progress. We're all young countries in the region, and if you look back to the 70 odd years that we have been independent, I think each of us has made remarkable progress. Yet, the intractable problems that lie before us, large populations and large geographies within our countries that appear to be falling behind in the development process. How can we ensure that we can apply science and technology and data science to understand their problems and find solutions to them? And finally, the last question: how might we collaborate as a collective in South Asia? Each of us brings to the table remarkable strengths, but we tend to work in silos. Just think of it this way: if we were to collaborate, bring our strengths together, and create, critical mass, actually generate a multiplier effect, I think we can do remarkable things together. I'll stop here. With this, I would like to now open the floor for discussion.
So we are looking at how think tanks have changed, how have internal and external processes changed, and has the pandemic impacted the goals and objectives of the organization? Has there been changes in the way think tanks have been working? And what are the stakeholder dynamics that we are dealing with? These are the issues that we know. So from Pakistan, Dr. Suleri is sharing his experience in Pakistan of SDPI, and I'm sharing my experience at SEPA in Sri Lanka. We are not going into any details of discussing about what think tanks are, etc. Basically, independent organizations that groups of people come together to do research, generate knowledge, and share this, disseminate it to important stakeholders. That's what we are doing. Now, the pandemic gives us a good opportunity to reflect on how we have worked and if we need to re-strategize the way we are working. Each of us working in our independent capacities in our different countries, we are successful in certain ways, but we could be more successful if we network and strengthen our capacities across borders, so to say. So in terms of so the pandemic gives us a good opportunity to reflect, learn, and redirect ourselves. That's how I see it. We're not going to discuss about the pandemic itself in detail. It gives us a context that we're talking about for the think tanks. So just to share some basic information about the country as well as the pandemic situation. And I hope you can see the slides now that I've sent. Basically, what I'm presenting is in March 2020, we had the first case of COVID in Sri Lanka, diagnosed as positive. Now, since then, the situation has actually developed where practically the COVID is there in all of the different districts, excepting for two small pockets of a medical officers area up in the north. Other than that, it's all in the different places. So the parameters that have been used to measure the prevalence of COVID is presented in the slide. So yellow means that no cases have been reported. Green is low risk where it has been reported before 14 days. And red means cases reported within 14 days. So which means that it's all over the country. Now, Health Promotion Bureau of Government of Sri Lanka gives the following statistics which are important. The Sri Lanka population is 21 plus million people. Life expectancy is in its 70s, for 72 for men and 79 for women. Population under 15 is about 30%, 15, and then the over 65 is 8% of the population. So at present, this data is monitored on a daily basis. At present, when I checked last, the COVID positive patients are 218,000. Deaths about 0.92%. Globally, it's 2.16%. So Sri Lanka is, in terms of global rates, is pretty okay, good. So recovery and discharge is 84%, whereas global it's high. So our recovery and discharge rates are low compared to global standard. Okay, so we've gone through this. I'm going to the Okay, when it comes to comparing in the two different countries, the COVID deaths per 1 million people, Sri Lanka is 6, whereas in India it's 251. Southeast Asia region as a whole is 210. So in terms of the comparatively, Sri Lanka is fairly okay. In terms of vaccinations, we have 20 million people in the country. Then first dose has been administered 2.2 million people. This is an interesting situation. I will talk about it in my later presentation about the politics of this. So the managing the pandemic, I have put some points here. So we had a pandemic, which is known as the Spanish flu, which all of us now talk about. But the older generation of people, older than I myself, they remember this quite well. But I think this memory has faded and people don't know too much about what happened in the past when the Spanish flu hit the world. Our situation is that I've collected this information from the literature that is available, research literature on the pandemic and related issues. So what we have seen is in the Sri Lanka, the mechanism that has been developed to manage the pandemic is extremely state-centric and very politicized. It's not an inclusive thing, and it has been taken away from keeping its center in the public health domain. So it has been taken out of that, and the mechanism that they have set up, the government has set up, is extremely militarized. So it's a military that is actually at the helm of the entire machinery, which is created a lot of concerns. But the government has continued regardless. So although there are independent think tanks that look at various issues, including the pandemic, whether the government actually takes this into account is quite questionable. So the government has adopted a very divisive approach to dealing with the pandemic. The research shows that it's the benefits that go to the affected people is not equitably distributed, that it's very unequally distributed. Particularly, there's a lot of political patronage that decides who gets what. That's another major issue is that there is information overload. There's a lot of stuff moving around in the internet, and the reliability and the validity of this information is highly questionable. So amongst the various agencies that are responsible for managing the COVID, there is no public-private partnerships that actually come up, that has the ability to deal with many of the issues that we are facing. So I'm moving down. Okay. So in terms of the think tanks, I mean, they are known to be, we know that we produce very high quality research, knowledge products, and there's quite a good production of information that is disseminated in ways that each agency or think tank is comfortable and uses. So there's a very high use of social media, and it continues, and they still maintain the reputation of being independent researcher. I put it within quotes. Even there, one can question degree of independence. There are lots of things that we would like to do, but for various reasons, particularly because of funding situations, we are then driven to donors or the funders' agenda. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So so there is research going on, there is funds coming in, but then the funder decides what are their priorities. Now, in terms of the areas in which we need improvement, is that we tend to be rather insular. There's limited discussions amongst the different think tanks, and there is limited sharing of experiences amongst the think tanks. We tend to operate in our own comfort zones. There's very limited activism amongst the think tanks as a collective to influence, to advocate for change, and efforts to influence government and policy making can be much stronger and much better. The fact that we don't come together is the limitation. There is very little public mobilization, public opinion mobilization, activism that we can be proud of. Hardly any activities that people get out to show their resentment, either in the social media or physically outside. So we don't operate on a campaign mode other than in the social media, which is effective to some extent, but not fully robust and effective. So we don't have a common coordinated media or knowledge products development. We don't have a shared way of doing this. Although there are various ICT-based platforms in which each of us operate, but not a collective platform. So what we could, so production of these material, policy briefs, etc., are independently done, quite independently, and think really we are operating in almost like silos, if I can say. So that needs to change. The COVID, as well as many others problems, requires a multidisciplinary approach. And then amongst these different think tanks, there would be that required mass of multidisciplinary personnel, which can be brought together, mobilized in order to respond to public health issues such as the COVID or any other thing. So there needs to be a coordinated effort, which we don't have, moderated, probably in a fiber hub that brings organizations and individuals together for debate and so. So then coming back to the last point is that this initiative, which talks about a regional collective strength, is that can have influence on governments and other important stakeholders, is a really required thing in the present context as well as for the future.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure sharing how this COVID-19 has actually reshaped and also redefined the ways of working of STPI as well as other think tanks in Pakistan. Just to give you a brief picture of COVID-19 in Pakistan, so far we have around 0.94 million cases in Pakistan and around 21,000 deaths. Looking at the vaccination in a country of 220 million, we have now got around 11 million doses of vaccine injected. Around 3.5 million people, they are fully vaccinated. The rest of them, they have got their single dose. With this, when it came to the ways of working and how think tank changed, I think the first effect that we found that was on our ways of doing work. STPI, we have been working online for last 1.5 year now. Almost 2/3 of our staff, they are working from home, while 1/3 staff, they come to office. Initially, it was quite difficult to adapt to this remote way of working. It was also expensive, buying all those softwares which could enable us to work as a team. But gradually we realized that it has actually enhanced our efficiency and productivity and our work output. Resultantly, STPI, we used to have 2.5 floor in the building where we are located. We have already vacated 1 floor for good. So we plan that even if things they get normalized, we'll keep on adapting this flexibility of working from home. We also tried it for our advocacy and our annual conference, which was conducted online. And those of you who have attended any of STPI Sustainable Development Conference, they know the magnitude of the conference. It was inaugurated by President of Pakistan, concluded by the Secretary General of SCO, but all the panels, the parallel panels, those were online, and we conducted it quite successfully. So this was the first lesson that we learned. The second thing was it was a reduction in our funding. Obviously, most of the funding, it was rightly going to health and COVID-related issues. And STPI felt a major brunt where both domestic as well as international funding the sources of funding, those were reduced. And I think that's where our major ways of doing work, sectoral work, that we are a multidisciplinary think tank, that helped us a lot. Uh, I can imagine that many think tanks who had a singular focus, just focused on any single discipline besides health, perhaps they could have found it extremely difficult to survive. But because we were working on almost each and every aspect of sustainable development, so we quickly adapted to three major themes. One is the social protection and how the fiscal stimulus and the policies that assure social protection, they can reach to the right target group. Second is food security, the impact of COVID-19 on food supply chains, on food security, and what can be done differently. And third is, of course, health-related issues, how we could strengthen our public health infrastructure. And again, that is something that worked for us. We immediately went to this stakeholder consultation mode, dialogues after dialogues with all the key stakeholders. And based on those, I think the first 6 months of COVID, we were just focused on conducting webinars and conducting stakeholder discussions, roundtables, one-on-one meetings, and on the basis of which we prepared certain policy recommendations that the Prime Minister Office adopted quite quickly, because most of them, they were quite relevant. So STPI was asked to prepare a food security portal or food security dashboard. This is a technological tool which actually provides a real-time information of food stocks and their demand in at a district level vis-a-vis the price fluctuation. So that was one of the recommendations that was accepted by Prime Minister Office, and then STPI was asked to prepare this dashboard. Second was our recommendations for targeted cash transfer, the food, the social security nets. And third was our recommendation for broader macro policy initiatives. Again, it's being relevant that helped, and I feel that because we knew that what were the policy asks from the government, so we could immediately supply those. And initially, it was without any funding. When we started working on it, food security dashboard, it was picked by IDRC and FCDO. So the actual software then we got developed with the help of these two organizations. Finally, I would say that now we are quite closely working with the government of Pakistan, and it is about awareness on vaccine, why people, they should get vaccinated. So we have launched a policy outreach campaign, No One is Safe Until Everyone is Safe. And under that campaign, we are conducting different advocacy activities, different policy initiatives. We are making the best use of social media. And of course, that social media and online ways of working, that has helped us to work closely with our stakeholders, both in Pakistan as well as internationally. So only last week, on the eve of event of World Environment Day, where Pakistan was the global host, STPI with the United Nations Environment Program, we had conducted quite a few hybrid activities in all provincial capitals of Pakistan, as well as some regional activities. So if I look at STPI's experience, I would say that the flexibility and our capacity to quickly adapt to the changing circumstances, that actually helped us. But then I can relate to many of the think tanks in Pakistan who couldn't adapt that quickly, or who were not flexible enough to adapt either sectorally, their area of specialization or their ways of working. Those are actually getting affected badly due to the shrinkage of funding, as well as shrinkage of space where they can relate and they can create a difference.
Taking cue from my previous speakers, I can also share some of the experiences which are similar to them. Yeah, I mean, if I just categorize by internal and external challenges, of course, internally it was totally a different and new terrain of work, new ways of doing things, because this concept of work from home has never been there for us. And so, however, immediately after the outbreak of the pandemic and immediately after it was announced by the government, the lockdown, then we had to go to work from home mode. But I would say that given that the level of skills, at least technological skills and all, we could quickly adapt to the new situation. There are various technologies which are which not only helps you to work, continue the way you work, but also sometimes monitor and keep a track of the progress of our activities. So that has really helped. But I would say that if a lesson could be taken from here, that there is still more scopes for increasing the efficiency and skills in terms of adapting to the situation like this. But however, even though I also found that in fact the workload had increased substantially when we are at home, because you sit in the morning and then you are in front of the computer till you go to sleep. So there was no hour. And also, since the whole world was also from working from home mode, so you just, you are logged onto the laptop and interacting with colleagues across the world. So it was also quite time heavy, and the workload, I think, substantially increased. And I would say that at least in my organizations, colleagues have been really adaptive to the situation and without any complaint. But again, after a certain period, I think there was some sort of boredom, because then you are just confined within the four walls. So we had, at one point in time, we had opened the office and we started to come to offices by rotation. And then this year in March, we started full office. But then immediately again, because of the second wave, we had to again start working from home. So we are just juggling from changing our one mode to the other. That's what is happening. But still the activities are continuing. And I would say that as Dr. Suleri has mentioned, that we could quickly also shift the focus of our activities. We work on economic and social issues, but we don't work on any specific area, but all the macroeconomic issues and also sectoral issues. So health was, of course, always a focus of our activities. And given the importance of the COVID impact, we could work on a number of areas, including, of course, the implications of COVID-19 on various sectors of the economy, and then what would be the impact of the lockdown, and in terms of employment and income erosion and poverty, inequality, all these aspects we have done. And as all the other organizations, we had also conducted a number of online surveys, telephone surveys, and also face-to-face surveys we have done at some point when the situation improved a little bit. So we are discussing also that the donors had also shifted their focus because of the significance or the extent of because of the extent of this COVID. So many of their fund had to be focused towards taking actions rather than giving support to the think tanks. So that from that point of view, there was a shrinkage of funds. But again, I think those who had this multi-dimensional activities. They could also, spread their work and continue their work. And CPD was one of those organizations. And also, since we were also working from home, there was some, cost management, also cost rationalization that also helped again. But externally, I would also say that now, how can we address similar challenges? This is a lesson for future. I would say that this we don't expect, anything like this in future. But if we ever have to change or continue the productivity, continue our activities, one lesson would be, of course, that we have more skills and capacity, and in terms of infrastructure, so that we can provide all infrastructural facilities to all colleagues so that they can work from home without any interruption. Of course, that didn't happen because they all had their own technological device. But if the office could support that, that would have been better. And also, I think it is also a responsibility. This is one. Then, of course, the second one, definitely in terms of resource mobilization, that's the constant challenge. But that also, this COVID has also given the lesson that if you can quickly, cater to the problem and conceptualize your areas of work, and work towards that, that is very useful. So several, in our country, we haven't seen any surveys from the government agencies. But at the point when this type of crisis arises, data is so important. Because data-based, evidence-based decision-making is critical to have a proper, decision to address this problem. But we haven't seen, unfortunately. So what has happened that think tanks, independent think tanks like CPD and many others, they had quickly, undertaken surveys, large surveys, so that we can have an idea. So we could service that. And we could also not only, analyze intellectual exercise, it was not an intellectual exercise itself, but also giving the suggestions, evidence-based suggestions, policy recommendations to the policymakers. However, I would also say that this was an experience, at least in the case of Bangladesh, there is an inertia, or there's a lack of interest to engage the non-state actors in the whole process of managing the COVID crisis. Not only, not only in terms of field-based actions. For example, in Bangladesh, several organizations traditionally, historically, has been working at the field level, and they have been addressing and working to tackle various disasters in the past, like natural disasters, flood, cyclone, and all these. And they have been doing quite efficiently, quite successfully. But this time we have seen that the government had not engaged those organizations. They just kept a separate wall. And this was exclusively a bureaucratic exercise. But this is one. And secondly, also from the think tanks input. So that has always been the case that they have a sort of disinterest towards the findings of think tanks. But in this case, since they didn't have any numbers or any surveys on the fallout of COVID-19, the surveys or the data generated by the non-state think tanks, non-state actors, or the think tanks, independent think tanks, could have helped, but there was again this inertia or lack of interest. So the whole non-state actor community has been distanced, has been kept outside the whole management of the COVID situation. So this is a lesson, but experience. But the lesson is that you continue to do what what is the purpose of your mission or the objective of the think tank. So that is what is, I think, one of the important lessons. And I think this is also a time to contribute from wherever you are. So think tank in our country, I think that has those have played a critical role in terms of generating knowledge, which can help in undertaking policies which are, and these types of policies which are backed by data, field generated, evidence-based data, this tend to be robust and more, I think, maybe more successful.
Just giving a brief overview of this COVID in Nepal. We have out of 77 districts, all of those are affected with COVID. So only 6 are below, less than 200 cases, but almost all have the cases of more 400 plus. Until this date, we have 610,000 people, total cases of COVID. And we have comparatively, compared to other places, we have only 8,465 deaths, so it's comparatively low. But if you look at the data, it's the main group, age group that has been affected by this COVID is from 20 years of age to 40. So this is quite different from the first wave that which had impact on the earlier and elderly people. So, and since 4th week of April, we have been in lockdown and we're working from home. So let me give you a brief, the challenges that we faced during the COVID. The first phase was kind of, disturbing in the sense that it was gray and many questions were unanswered. People were, scared and they were panicked. The availability of vaccine was also uncertain. And there was cases of, suicides and depression in the first year of the lockdown and first wave of the lockdown. And there were, some effort made by the government to establish quarantines at the border side, and there were isolation centers, but they were poorly maintained. So in the second wave, the government, didn't ask people to stay at home isolation rather than, going in the quarantine, which was in fact a breeding place for the COVID. So the second wave also came as a huge blow with the new strand of the virus, and it affected every sector of the society, particularly tourism, and we have affected hotel, schools, and everything. And in just as I said, all age group were affected in this second wave of COVID. And from April to May, the situation was way out of hand, and there were no oxygens in the hospitals. There were no ventilators, and ICUs and the beds were unavailable. So people were just dying outside hospital. It was pretty, pathetic situation. And the priority also shifted from, earlier in the first phase, it was you were running after food supplies, you were running after LPGs, masks and sanitizer. But in the second phase, it was oxygen you are running after, you were running after ventilators, and we were seeking isolation centers with plenty of beds. So the things has little, come down after the first week of June. That the rates has come down and we're pretty much stable right now. And till this date, I think the government has received around 3 million vaccines from India and China, and still a lot more to be done. So there are a lot of learning from this COVID. Like this is the first time in Nepal that the importance of research has been felt. And we also talk about wash, and the wash situation has improved, that people have started washing their hands using sanitation. And it's not only saving them from COVID, but also other communicable diseases and other waterborne diseases and air pollution, like we have lots of air pollution in Kathmandu Valley and elsewhere. And another great achievement is that, in Nepal, the farmers have now access to ICTs, with the mobile phones, they know where the market is. And they have been reaching the consumers directly at home. So this is a good achievement that we have in Nepal. And another one is urban centers, and people have been start growing vegetables at their homes, in the terrace and their rooftops, which is at least they can have fresh vegetables. And another one great achieve that we have since the last 1.5 years, that the e-learning platform has done substantially improvement. Now we have, even in schools, we have good teachers. They are well trained on how to speak in online, how to take classes online. And as we have, everybody is aware that the seminars has turned into webinars, that we are and the result of which that we are communicating right now, and we have been experts from different regions can come together and discuss in particular issues. So in terms of when I have to talk about our challenges in terms of organizations, we had a serious implication at our work. Since we are working from home, there has been problem with the net, and even the like Famida said, the environment at home is completely different than working at home and talking in face and discussion and bringing discussing an outcome. So everything has been affected. So the primary thing that I am facing right now is managing and retaining staff. So what have, in some of our project, we have, the donors have gone for the no cost extension. So even in this, larger shrinking of the fund and, very few projects, when you have no cost extension in the project, and you have to retain that staff to carry out the further work, then that's a lot of burden for the organization. So, and other thing also that doesn't come, lately, but we had that problem, and the problem stresses with the staff. Some of them were in isolation, and they were infected in COVID. And when other staff and family members died, their relatives died, so they were unreachable, and they couldn't work and produce output at the time. And as we've been sharing this information, since earlier times, since ages, what government thinks is NGO in particular is all NGOs are same, and they work in a brick and mortar, and they work on hardware. They build toilets, they build drinking water schemes and other things. They put that in same category. So this has been a biggest hurdle for us to function as a think tank in Nepal. And nevertheless, we are making effort to cross this barrier. And I think the Social Welfare Council, who is a regulator of NGOs, has started recognizing this, and they have categorized. They are working to categorize NGOs as which is implementing or which is a policy research organization, or in that category. And during this lockdown, we had been affected, like last year. Our project has to be closed down, terminated by the donor, because it was field-based, and they think it was not possible to go to field at that moment. So it has terminated, and we had lost so big amount of money. So similarly, in this second wave also, government asked us to allocate 20% of our project budget to COVID. So which was very difficult to do, since our donors did not allow us to use the fund to manage COVID. So what had to be done was to modify our work plan and try to capture the context of COVID in the research, to blend it, the COVID learning in the research, rather than diverting fund from the COVID. So what happened in the it has come quite a time. The fund is shrinking, but what had COVID done is it has brought number of many funding to health related research and other areas. But since I said Nepal is focused on climate change, DRR, we didn't have so much track record of working on health research, so we couldn't cash that fund. So that was the biggest challenge we faced. And regarding data collection from the field it was quite difficult because many times a municipality or a village municipality, they require PCR to be done and tested negative to come to their places. So every time you go to field on some intermediate basis, then you have to do PCR. So that has been quite challenging to us. So even if you go to field, you have to follow government protocols to wearing masks, using sanitizers and maintaining physical distance. That you did, but what was the challenge was to bring people as a focus group discussion and getting data from them, getting information from them. They didn't want to participate and they didn't want to come. They want to maintain physical distance. So KIA was something that we could do, but we couldn't gather people to come and discuss physically. So in terms of database, what we are doing is we are working with a quorum community of rainfall measuring entities. It's a network. So we are gathering rainfall information and trying to develop database on rainfall. So we also know that there are very limited rain gauges installed by DHM. So if we can have this citizen science concept of generating knowledge, generating data from individuals, particularly students involving school students, then we can develop database. And we are also exploring this type of initiative can be done in other sectors that we are working, such as in terms of climate change or in disaster risk reduction. So I think these are the basic challenges that we have.
I am Asan. I am from Myanmar. Nice to meet you all. And I work for the organization called the Center for Development and Ethnic Studies, in which we are doing mainly, we study federalism and disseminate the knowledge of federalism, democracy, and peace building. And as well as we are supporting the peace negotiation between the government and ethnic armed organizations in my country. The COVID-19, the pandemic started in Myanmar in March last year. And then starting from April, there become homestays and lockdowns and so on. So at the very beginning, everybody got shocked. And then for our organization as well, it took us around 3 months to review and also trying to change our activity based on their needs and so on. It was quite very difficult at first. But the thing, another good thing is that the government very much prioritized in response to COVID-19. And almost 80% of civil societies in my country, they divert their resource to supporting the people that are affected by COVID-19. The people who are mainly affected by the pandemics are the manufacturer worker, the basic workers. They are the majority in this country. And the many civil society, they divert their money to support food and a lot of shelter needed for the people and so on. The government also prioritized so much and things were quite handled well, in my opinion. And in my organization as well, starting from last year, March, we apply work from home until today. So, and the lucky thing is that I don't have many staff. I have only 22 staff. So no staff is fired, everybody stay, everybody is paid fully until today. This is the things that I'm happy about my staff. The blessing in disguise in regard to my organization work is that because of the COVID-19, people cannot meet. But the good thing happened is that since we are engaging with the multi-stakeholders in my country, it become more easier to have the frequent meeting, regular meeting through online, through Zoom meeting. So many meetings, informal meetings are going on. And last year, July, we even organized the Union Peace Conference, and everybody was very happy. And then during the second wave of the COVID-19, so we have like every day, thousands of people found the COVID, and then hundreds of people die daily. And this year's January, the Indian government, they donated around 1.5 million vaccines for Myanmar. And at that point, everybody was very hopeful that the vaccines is coming and all the people are become to get used to in the new normal and so on. But very unfortunately, back in February 1st, the military took power from the democratically elected government. And then starting from the coup, February 1, in this country, we no longer have the COVID-19. So before the coup, we have like daily 1,500, 2,000 people found. But starting from the coup, everybody in this country, we forgot the pandemic and everybody got frustrated. Everybody comes on the road, millions of people. And then until today, it's been 4 months, we don't have no COVID case because the government stopped functioning. Health worker, they join the civil disobedience movement. And at the moment, 70 to 75% of the civil servants, they are engaging in civil disobedience movement and they no longer work for this military junta. So the military, the current government, it is defunct. In that situation, for my organization like CDES, we have to choose. We used to say that think tank is to be neutral, but in that case, we cannot be neutral. What the military did was unjust. So we have to stand for the just thing. So our organization as well, at the moment, what we are doing is we also don't engage with this government. And so we no longer extend our registration with this government. So disengagement. So this is what we are doing. And instead, we are supporting the democratic group, the people, and then the national unity government formed by the democratically elected people, democratic elected member of parliaments back in November, general elections and so on. This is how we are doing at the moment. But starting from a few days, like 2 or 3 days now, the military in their very well controlled area, they become to report the case about the COVID-19 affected people. And so now we are become to have some cases, like a few people die. Those reports are coming out at the moment. But for the generally people, all our hope were destroyed. And at the moment, COVID-19 is there for sure, but people cannot focus much of that. So what I would like to invite and also encourage our neighbors country, and which is that for Myanmar, now we cannot work very much. So my organization cannot function at the moment. I am also in the hiding. I have like 2 or 3 places for safe house, moving one place to another. Some of my staff go abroad and some are in armed revolutions and so on. Many people are already spreading. So at the moment, what we are trying is that the international community also put pressure on this military junta, not to recognize them, but to put pressure, and then international community pressure and support to the Myanmar people is very much needed. This is what we are now.
We have 2 very distinguished discussants or observers, and I'll now invite them to share their thoughts on the presentations made by the various executive directors. We have Jai Asundi, who's from C-Step, Bangalore, primarily a science and technology think tank. We also have Nitin Pai from Takshashila, which looks at foreign policy, geopolitics, and both will have, I'm sure, many interesting things to say.
Of course, unfortunate that in this particular circumstance, which is of COVID-19, that has pretty much affected the entire subcontinent quite significantly. To be very honest with you, I was hoping to hear some notes on, issues related to science and technology and how science and technology could be leveraged in this particular at this particular point in time. And while I do see that in some areas there are some levels of, as we would call, as Mr. Jayat Tilaka rightly said, that there are donor agendas and some of the research is moving in that particular direction. And then, of course, it was heartening to hear SDPI working on issues related to food security, healthcare, and social protection. I think these are things that are issues of climate change that will remain for a long period of time. On the other hand, what really surprised me was that there was not too much mention on the idea of investment in clean energy or in the issue of investment in healthcare that could radically transform our societies going forward. And this is something that we have been trying to push with the government, especially now, that if there is going to be so much investment in recovery, it should happen in the areas of things that can help us over the next couple of decades rather than just the next year or so. And it should be in the areas of clean energy and climate. I think overall, it was interesting to note that all the countries in the subcontinent have faced a fairly harsh second wave, and it has really upended some of the uh, uh, operations of many of the organizations. As Mr. Dixit very nicely put it, saying that many donors have given them no cost extensions. But I find this term no cost extension very odd, because the cost is to the donor, not to the entity that is facing it. You still have to pay salaries to your employees, or you have to continue to keep them on the rolls. And so I don't understand this concept of a no cost extension. I mean, no cost to whom? So anyway, so that aside, my heart goes out to Asang in Myanmar. I'm sure they're facing a very difficult and tough situation, and I hope they will get out of this fairly soon and get back to a democratic setup. And I think that is something that we all wish for each other in the subcontinent. I know there was a comment about women being affected more in this particular lockdown because the burden of children and taking care of them and families is more so on them. And I do feel that it's something that in our organization, we have been fairly conscious of that. We have been fairly flexible in our ability to conduct work. We have not been too insistent on the same levels of productivity, but it is heartening to note that in some of the areas we have been fairly productive. The people have been productive. So I don't want to take too much into that. I think it is something that is a good thing to know. And I think the last note that I'll leave with is that we are going to get into a new normal. I think the very fact that SDPI gave up an entire floor and will not see them taking back that space is a very good indicator even for us that we might actually shrink the amount of space that we might have to use, and that effectively reduces our what I would call fixed costs or the core expenses. And maybe then we would be able to spend more of our time and effort on the research projects that are required.
Make four broad points. Let me first, in the first two, just tease what I saw as an observer, what I saw from the presentations and the points made so far by people who are deeply engaged in their communities and with greater experience in this space. I think the first thing which came out quite clearly is that think tanks that have a diversity of subjects and domains that they're engaged in have a better chance of coping with crises like this pandemic or something else. So if you're doing 3 or 4 things, it's likely that all 4 will not be knocked out at the same time. So for those of us who are planning, for the future, I think it makes sense to think of diversity. And as an engineer, we always talk about orthogonal, right, where things are 90 degrees to each other. So the chances of both being down at the same time tend to be lower. And that's our experience as well. For example, what we did at Takshashila last year was we took upon the entire COVID portfolio over and above everything else we were doing. And we were able to deliver useful input into the public space. Now, this also brings us to an interesting idea that you might want to do multiple things, but you need staff who are able to do multiple things, right? So you can't have a cross domain, you can't do 5 domains and have 5 parallel sets of staff because that's not going to be affordable. So you'll need, when we hire, I think we'll have to hire for people who have multiple skills and competencies. The second, I think, which came out very clearly is, I think, about the role of technology. And all of us are here thanks to technology. So as a means of business continuity, I think technology has been superb. Many of us have been on various kinds of learning curves, investment curves, because many of us might not have invested in the kind of technology that we needed for business continuity. But I think overall, most of us in this space have managed to get onto technology. But here, I think there's a difference, and this is partly my observation in what we've been doing at Takshashila, is that technology is extremely useful for business continuity and let's say operational and analytical things that you sit in one place in front of a computer and probably email your colleagues once a day and share information and so on. Operational things, analytical things. I think technology has been really useful, and we've found that our operational effectiveness, efficiency has improved quite a lot because you don't have to commute, you don't have to travel, so all of that gets reduced. But I think the downside has been in terms of convening, because a lot of the work that think tanks do is not quantifiable because it's about when a bunch of people sit together around a cafeteria table or go for a trip or have an event, and then there's a conversation which happens at the sidelines next to the water cooler and coffee and chai and so on. So that kind of intangible gain has been lost because of the technology thing, because we are not doing convening. Creative solutioning, again, I think has suffered because you can't get people together, go onto a whiteboard and scribble and talk in the same kind of familiarity and ease that we are used to. I mean, a purely digital person probably can do this, but all of us are not purely digital. We are coming into the digital space from a non-digital space. So for us to get onto a fully digital brainstorming session is not easy, right? So there's been a problem. And I think from my own observation, and like what some of you said, is that if your work requires to be on the ground, service delivery, justice, listening to people, fighting for rights, and so on, I think it's extremely hard to do that without a severe moral dilemma. In fact, one of the questions which we've been giving our students, our public policy students, is the idea of protests during a pandemic. It's a moral dilemma because a public protest during a pandemic means that you are risking contagion, but not protesting is also risky because the cause of justice, the pandemic becomes one more tool in the suppression of the cause of justice. So, and this is a dilemma which I think organizations face. And finally, the last set of points is what Jay mentioned about technology. and science. If I were to bunch all of this together, there's a set of issues which all of you mentioned, which is also what we are facing, is about politics, science, technology, data, right? All of this you can put together in one box. I think, look, people in this webinar are from different countries with different ideological orientations, different types of government, different political persuasions of government. In India itself, we have 30 state governments and one union government. Many of them are of different flavors. But if you see, by and large, across this political spectrum, across the different types of regimes that which govern our countries, there seems to be a politics as usual, in the sense that the political leadership is preoccupied with its own political agenda and not necessarily focusing resources on an existential crisis which society faces, right? So this could be in terms of, are we putting all our political heads together, taking a national approach towards solving a particular problem? What about budgets? The clearest indicator of your priorities is how much money are you spending and where? And are we bringing together that kind of money as government into solving these things? And I think that's been a big question mark. And I think we've got to reflect on this. Why is it that this is the case across governments? Similarly, across societies, because all the societies that we are part of, and here I think it's not just South Asian or subcontinental societies, but also Western societies, seem to be oblivious to the fact that science is the way out of this mess. It's science and reason are the way out of this mess. We tend to believe all kinds of weird, unsubstantiated, points of belief. We have social media which accentuates that. We have political systems which accentuate that. But I think at the broadest level, the fact that human society does not turn to science and take a firm conviction in science when faced with a conflict like issue like this in the 21st century, it's mind-boggling. And I think we've got to put a lot more thought into it, because it's not about just coming up with policy briefs like we do, which take recourse or data science, etc. It's about whether this method of making public arguments is acceptable to our societies or not. And if not, then what are the ways we need to persuade? So these would be my comments on what I've observed so far. And I'm left with a deep conviction that the commonalities in many of the ways many of the challenges we are facing is not just restricted to one country or one space alone, but largely it's global in nature. It's just the intensity of that is different in different countries.
The second part of the conference, namely looking ahead, what might be the 2 or 3 things that each of the participant organizations might look forward to do in the backdrop of the challenges and problems that have been discussed. Before I begin the round of discussions amongst all of you, I was just carrying out in my own head a sentiment analysis based on the speeches or the presentations that each of you made. And some of the terms that resonated in all your presentations were technology, data, capacity, climate change, justice. These were themes that resonated in every one of you. If you look at what we need to do, what needs to change as we move forward, I would flag 3 issues. One is clearly the pandemic has brought home to us the extent of inequality in our society. We talk of COVID appropriate behavior, but for a very large population in all our countries, it was quite simply life versus livelihood. It was not possible for many. For instance, let's say a slum dweller with 10 people living in one slum or in one hutment, to maintain social distance, to do masking or any of the other protocols. The second thing that has come out is the how gender has been pushed to the background. The normal RCH treatment, the health system has been overwhelmed, and reproductive and child health, including normal immunization programs, have sort of been pushed to the background. There's been a rise in domestic violence. And most important, there's been a rise, and there is evidence to point to this, of common mental disorders, particularly depression and anxiety, and especially among adolescent girls and women. So, this is something that we need to really take. And finally, the third thing is that the growing informalization of the labor market in the absence of a comprehensive social security system, a fragmented healthcare, public healthcare system, to which is the only recourse that the disadvantaged and vulnerable populations have, and the great digital divide in education, because of which large numbers of rural children in India and elsewhere in South Asia have been deprived of education in the last 1.5 years. These are issues that we need to grapple with looking ahead. So let me invite each of you now to make brief comments on what you think you would like to do, one or two things based on the themes that we have discussed moving forward in the next, say, year or two.
So to say, I'm new to this game. I'm new to SEPA. I like to see a little bit more coherence in terms of the personalities and institutions that are in this particular think tank network. I like to see a situation where we create some kind of a platform where each of us come to know better who we are, what we are, and what we're doing in terms of think tanks, research and advocacy work. That will help me to network with like-minded people. I like that to come out from this. But in terms of strengthening networks, I think that would be an important outcome if we can work towards that. That's number one. Number two is we are all generating knowledge. I have 3 points. Number one, this. Second is that we are all generating knowledge in our different spheres of life and work, but we are not necessarily sharing this knowledge effectively. Now with this new technology, we could be doing that a little bit more, maybe through a common kind of a platform where we identify the kinds of research that is important and that are common interest to member organizations in this network, to see what everybody can do and should be doing. Not that we are going to now change the whole of our agenda, but to have a kind of a regional common agenda that we could work on 1 or 2 issues, not more than that. I like that to be happening. Number 3 is that to see how we can synthesize this knowledge into some kind of a product, maybe a website, journals and publications are becoming a bit obsolete. A mechanism for synthesizing this knowledge and making better use of it. I'd be happy if I am able to see these 3 outcomes of this exercise that we are having today.
I think by virtue of what we have been trying to contribute in our given resources and given policy spaces, I would like to see the focus of our formal or informal network and the work in our organization to be more focused on sustainable development goals. So for our December conference, annual conference, the theme that we have chosen is beyond the pandemic, leaving no one behind. Looking at some of the positivity of silver lining that this COVID-19, it has provided, compelled the government to focus on this social development agenda, to allocate funds for social development, and also looking at some of the disadvantages due to this COVID-19, especially the marginalized and poor segments of our societies who are who would find it more difficult to catch up with the mainstream rising inequalities and inequities due to COVID-19. So this is what we are planning to do at STPI during 2021, and we'll be more than happy to join hands with any regional think tank, any supra-regional think tank, if we can do something together. Second point is that by virtue of our ease of connecting on these virtual platforms, perhaps we should try to compensate for the the lost opportunities of networking that we could have done during our physical meetings. I think one of the discussants, he very rightly mentioned that we are losing out on those opportunities, and perhaps the networks sometime they can actually just convene a meeting just to discuss informal discussion on certain agenda points rather than very formal presentations. Just a round table under Chatham House rule, whereby we can express our new ideas, we can express what can be done differently, we can learn from each other. I think these are the two messages that I have from today's discussion.
I have, I think, 3 points right now. The first one, I think I would emphasize once again that the role of data has become so important, and COVID has also pointed out and reiterated, because, for example, in order to have an efficient intervention in the areas of health, you need good public health data. Across the world, we are having several data, number of cases and also the number of deaths, but we quite often hear doubts about those numbers, because if we don't have good quality data, then you can't really take correct decision. Also, in case of other intervention, for example, for social protection, many countries, even in South Asia, also in Bangladesh as well, that the government has initiated social protection measures, stimulus packages. However, targeting those beneficiaries for the social protection measures, be it in the form of direct cash transfer or food support or all these. Firstly, there's a lack of authentic listing. And also the inclusivity. This is, those who are eligible, they are not on the list, and we don't really know. One doesn't really know that who are those beneficiaries and how many. And there is also difference between the rural areas and urban areas. So there are many other areas where we can say that COVID has also pointed out the need for correct and adequate, timely and disaggregated data. This is one. The second one is also, in order to to recover from the COVID-19 smoothly, that will require a medium-term strategy. It's not a matter of 1 year or 2 years. Because we don't know how long COVID is going to stay, and secondly, also how long it's going to take. How much time it's going to take for vaccinating the people, so that's these are the issues in terms of when you think about the strategy to recover from the COVID-19 impact, and these are all and this third point I was also going to mention is that exchange and share of knowledge which have been generated. Think tanks across the South Asian countries, they are across the South Asian region, they are generating a lot of data and also analysis. So it would be good to to synthesize, to also bring those knowledge together and share, and also make probably a common strategy. Some of the issues would be, of course, country specific, but there will be some which would be applicable for all countries. So, so this is regarding the exchange. And the fourth point I also wanted to highlight regarding the sustainability. So the other ones we have mentioned, those are both for external and internal intervention or initiative. But the other one is also that regarding the sustainability of the think tanks itself, since COVID has diverted some of the resources of the development partners. Now, many organizations are facing fund shortages. And also during COVID, we have also experienced that some of the larger donors have changed their strategies and focus. For example, DFID has been merged with the Foreign Office. Now FCDO it has emerged, which has totally different focus, their strategy, because they have a different political objective also. So the whole ideology of supporting think tanks or generating knowledge and contributing towards knowledge generation, that perception has been totally changed, and it is now viewed from a technocratic point of view. So I don't know about the other countries, but I can tell about Bangladesh that DFID or FCDO funding has been drastically cut. And even the largest NGOs, which is BRAC in Bangladesh, though it's largest in the world, so their fund has been totally stopped. I mean, it is a humongous amount. It's above 200 million, I think, or no, 500 million project, so $1 billion project. So that has been totally, slashed down, and also for many other organizations. So the sustainability of, so these are the, some of these organizations are not think tanks, they are do tanks even. So interventionists, where many, donors want to focus more. So if that kind of organization is facing such, stern measures in terms of receiving funds, how the think tanks will be facing, that's really, quite scary, in the sense that the sustainability of many think tanks will be jeopardized. So how in that new landscape of international support, the think tanks will survive, I think that has to be also thought through amongst ourselves. I remember in the past, during the TTI regime, we used to discuss in every regional meeting that the sustainability of the think tanks, how to survive at all. I think we are still struggling with that idea, and I don't know what lies in the future, but we should also think and put our heads together in terms of our sustainability. But financial sustainability in this case, of course, knowledge sustainability and policy interventions and all these are there. But I think as we have discussed that we have during COVID-19, we have focused and refocused our areas of work, our methods and modes of work. So that from the, from internal side, that's not a problem. But, so since for resources, we have to depend on external sources, that's going to be a challenge. So these are my points.
First of all, I like to thank IDIC for bringing us together, this wonderful team. What I've been hearing from the past few months, and even in the last meeting, that we are missing this opportunity, of meeting together frequently. And Dr. Sekhar Sir also highlighted in our last meeting, and Dr. Sulari and Dr. Fahmida also highlighted that we need to, have this regular type of meeting among think tanks, that how can we productively, move together. So we've been working in silos. Like everybody has their own agenda, and we never, advance each other's possibility of collaboration. Once we back and we have done training together after this TTI, so that was one effort. So if you can have this kind of, smaller interaction that doesn't require too much fund. So if we can get to big funding for collaboration, that's fine. Even if we don't have this kind of big funding, but we can collaborate in smaller things, like I want to. What if we explore possibility of volunteering for a product like, policy, bringing out policy brief, or even a small publication with a country cases, that will bind us together, and it will be, it will be collaborative effort too. If some opportunities, comes, then we can collectively apply together and get this funding and work together. That's what I think, Finally, I like to highlight that, I said Nepal has been missing this opportunity for last time, for a few, some time to have more interaction with think tanks like PAC and C-Steps and others, and we look forward, to more of these meetings. Thank you. First of all, I like to thank IDIC for bringing us together, this wonderful team. What I've been hearing from the past few months, and even in the last meeting, that we're missing this opportunity, of meeting together frequently. And Dr. Shekhar Sir also highlighted in our last meeting, and Dr. Sulari and Dr. Famida also highlighted that we need to, have this regular type of meeting among think tanks, that how can we productively, move together. So we've been working in silos, like everybody has their own agenda, and we never, advance each other's possibility of collaboration. Once we PAC and we have done training together after this TTI, so that was one effort. So if you can have this kind of smaller interaction that doesn't require too much fund. So if we can get to big funding for collaboration, that's fine. Even if we don't have this kind of big funding, but we can collaborate in smaller things, just like I want to. What if we explore possibility of volunteering for a product like policy, bringing out policy brief, or even a small publication with a country cases, that will bind us together, and it will be, it will be collaborative effort too. If some opportunities, comes, then we can collectively apply together and get this funding and work together. That's what I think, Finally, I like to highlight that, I said Nepal has been missing this opportunity for last time, for a few, some time to have more interaction with think tanks like PAC and C-Steps and others, and we look forward, to more of these meetings. Thank you.
I just want to say that On Think Tanks has played a very small role. This isn't really an event of On Think Tanks, rather it's an event of think tanks in South Asia that we have very happily supported, and we're happy to. And I'm glad that the issue of networking came out quite strongly, and Famida made I think an important point. And I do think that all of us, some of us miss the TTI events where not just networking happened at the regional level, but also at the international level. And many of the challenges that you have presented and shared with us, and many of the ways in which you have attempted to address those challenges are similar to the ones being experienced in Africa, in Latin America, but also in parts of Europe and North America. So there are a lot of opportunities to learn from each other. The second point I thought is important to make is that we feel that this experience, COVID itself, and what's the effect it has had on think tanks, really pushes us to think a bit more reflectively about our own institutions. What has been the specific effect of COVID on our staff, on certain parts of our staff, particularly women who have other roles in our societies often, on top of what they have to do at work. What has been the effect on our financial sustainability, on the business models of our organizations. And so I think these events should really be an excuse, not just to meet each other and engage, but also to think about how the context affects us, because think tanks often deal with the context and they try to affect the context, the policy context and the economical context and social context. But rarely they spend time thinking about how the context affects them. And I'm happy that we've had this chance to reflect on that. And that's really all I want to say. It's an opportunity to network and to learn together. And I hope we can continue to support it and join you in this effort. Thank you.
One of the things that think tanks can spend a lot more time and effort on is this aspect of infrastructural issues. And I think the topic did come up in the chat room also. While I did talk about energy infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure, I think this pandemic has also brought to rise the notion of digital infrastructure. While I do see the fact that in India, many of the vendors that I work with or I see, and maybe I'm also in Bangalore, so that's a very different ecosystem. I see a lot of people using digital infrastructure. I think this is a perfect time for that to be definitely part of that. The second one, I would like to also add to this idea that Famida brought upon, which I do want to at least bring out, is this idea of how do we make ourselves sustainable? If it's not for ourselves being sustainable, I think I would like to believe that we are providing particular value to society and coming up with ideas on what needs to be done going forward. And I feel that is one place where we need to spend some time sharing ideas on how we as think tanks can become more self-sustaining over a period of time, either in terms of our operations or in terms of the way we provide value to society. And it could be a combination of working on a certain set of things and collaborating on a certain set of things on that front. So I think I would leave with those two particular thoughts on this.
I think before the two ideas, the first thing I want to talk about is the positive dimension of this. I think the positive, which is already coming out and which will affect us in the next 10 years, in a 10-year time frame, is the massive amount of money which will enter health, public health, even business and production, productivity, technology, and so on, right? Because I would compare it to the situation after 9/11, where there was a massive amount of investment in security technology. Now, the analogy is only good so far, but the point here is that when so much of money enters the game, I think you will find a lot of interesting opportunities to find new and higher equilibrium than you would have in the past. Now, the question is, how do you align your sails to the new winds? And that, I think, is something which is in front of all of us. Okay, two big thoughts. I think the first is we cannot rely on the state to provide us with data. Now, the good news is there are multiple ways to obtain data by proxy if the state doesn't provide. All the way from looking at satellite imagery, which is freely available, to figure out how people are moving, to even get information from cellular telephony providers, macro aggregated information from taxi aggregators, from food aggregators, from Google. So many of these firms will be able to provide data for a social cause, and the ability to A, persuade them, and B, secure the data for public good is something which we should try, because we know government data, how good and how timely it is and how useful it can be, right? So in the absence of that, I think we've got options now. The second point is we have to invest in persuasion. In fact, I would think that this is the biggest point it has struck me in the last 1.5 years, is how do you persuade people around you? Now, it's very easy to persuade people when you're fighting for their rights and say, okay, we'll fight for justice, I'm on your side, and so on. But how do you persuade people to wear masks, how to do social distancing, to take vaccines, and behave in a way that doesn't spread the pandemic, right? We are not asking, It's very different when you say, I'm on your side and I'm fighting for you. And versus going and saying, look, this is the thing you need to do to protect yourself. Then obviously the question comes is, who are you? Who are you to tell me? And if we crack this, I think political persuasion becomes easier as well. Because ultimately, political leadership in whichever form it exists in our region is sensitive to to public opinion. And swinging public opinion through interesting, innovative means is probably the most important thing we need to do, with or without COVID, because we are in the information age.
There are a few interesting questions that have been shared on screen. I'll just go over them. Yes, I see Dr. Ajay Dikshit raising his hand. Go ahead, sir. Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. After having moved out from ISET, I think, it was good to be back and then get connected with all old colleagues and then to see them, well and doing and listening to their challenges. I just wanted to flag few points and then highlight this whole idea you mentioned about knowledge product and knowledge sharing and dialogue and conversation. Couple of points I just wanted to kind of highlight. The first is this whole example you mentioned, everybody mentioned about data. I think science really matters if you look at this whole pandemic. That's number one, that all think tanks need to focus. Second is that public institution with respect to public health matters. Third point, the citizens' trust, the relation between state and citizen, how that is playing out matters. So trust, I think, is a central question in how we respond to the pandemic. The fourth point, I think, is this whole issue of civic responsibility. How do we as society respond to this, existential challenges, which has taken many of our near and dear ones. We've lost them. We have lost friends. We have lost family members, and it's been a very painful, story for many of us. And then the fifth point, I think, is the political choice we make. Political choice we make. We are governed by sovereignty, our own country's laws, but within each of these entities, the kind of political choice we make within and then across border, I think, is very, very important. And those are the points I think we need to begin to think seriously and get into conversation. One of the points I thought perhaps was, despite having spent 10 years together, we were a little bit late or perhaps not forthcoming in collaborating as far as this pandemic is concerned. Now, the final point is, in the lockdown about 6 months ago, ISET Nepal is incubating a platform of dialogue. It's called SONAS, South Asia Nadi Shambad, South Asia River Dialogue. The basic idea was to use water as an entry point, but we're kind of gradually expanding into much broader canvas of learning. The last post, the post before this was by Samar Verma, our TTI program officer in Delhi. He's written about, capitalism and then the whole need to recalibrate this idea of GDP. So therefore, it's soanas.com. .org, I beg your pardon. Please go into the website, take a look at the postings, and it could be one of the platforms where we bring some of these ideas together, amplify it, and then to continue this dialogue that you mentioned forward. Very well said. Thank you very much, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Dikshit. Nice to see you after a long gap. Nice to see that you're still active and contributing to the development process. Anybody else who would like to come in with last comments there? Otherwise, I'll go to some of the questions. One of which I thought we could start with a question raised by Mariam Shabir on how do we go about the ecosystem restoration during COVID-19 and post-COVID world. She says it's another topic that would be of interest for collaboration. So any thoughts, any comments from any of the panelists on, perhaps Kanchan would like to come in with this. you've been doing some work. ISET Nepal has been in the forefront of ecosystems and climate change and so on. Would you like to comment on how do you think we might go about restoring the ecosystem in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, this is good. Thank Mariam. Actually, we've been working on restoration of not actually the restoration of ecosystem, but in align with that, working with the communities along the riverbeds, river banks, and with the fishermen and other communities, who can actually take steps to restore the whole ecosystem, our freshwater ecosystem. So currently, we are also working with universities on this aspect. We're designing this. We have designed this conference for the students, where there is special session. They have different sessions where we can chip in the idea of restoring ecosystems. So I don't know. How do we mix this whole ecosystem restoration by bringing COVID in it? It's a really thing we need to discuss further. But we've been working on all kinds of activities from the field level to the ministry level, so we can somewhere start thinking on this aspect.
Thing I thought we could discuss of taking forward basis this conference. How many of you would be interested in partnering with us in establishing what I might, in a preliminary way, describe as a South Asia knowledge exchange, a digital exchange, which will try to encourage sharing of knowledge on a digital platform. Essentially, it works exactly like any exchange would. There would be at one end the knowledge seeker and at another end the knowledge provider. If, let's say, there has been a successful good practice or success story in Pakistan, and that problem can be addressed in another country of South Asia, and somebody can come forward and say that this is something that we have tried, we have demonstrated proof of concept, we've scaled this solution, so you could perhaps sort it out. So the idea of a knowledge exchange would actually be to see if we can address the problem of data as well as knowledge product sharing amongst the countries of South Asia. If you would like to, I would suggest all of you think about it and then respond to Dr. Annapurna, who will be the contact person for this. If there's enough traction and if there's enough interest amongst the participant think tanks, not just the panelists, but others who are participants, we'd be very happy to initiate the process of at least looking at what kinds of designs might work.